Paris, the year 1909. A clock is running out on the most famous structure in the world, and almost no one wants to stop it. The Eiffel Tower has stood for 20 years. That was the deal. 20 years and then it comes down. The permit is expiring. The city intends to dismantle the iron giant, melt it into scrap, and give the land back to the open sky above the Champ de Mars. And in a small laboratory near its base, one aging engineer is racing against that clock, not to make the tower beautiful, but to make it useful, listening through the night for a signal no human ear could hear. To understand how it came to this, you have to go back 20 years, to the moment the tower was born already condemned. In 1889, Paris hosted a World's Fair to mark a century since the French Revolution. France wanted a monument, something that would announce to the world that this was the future. The man who won the commission was Gustave Eiffel, a contractor and structural engineer who had made his name building iron bridges and the inner skeleton of the Statue of Liberty. His design was a tower of wrought iron, 300 meters tall, assembled from more than 18,000 individual iron pieces and held together by some 2.5 million rivets. It was the tallest structure humanity had ever built, and for 4 decades nothing on earth would rise higher. But there was a condition written into the contract from the start. The tower was temporary. After 20 years, ownership would revert to the city of Paris, which was free to tear it down. Eiffel had agreed because it was the only way the project would ever be approved. The tower was, on paper, a guest with an expiration date, and many Parisians could not wait for that date to arrive. To a large part of the city's artists and intellectuals, the tower was not a marvel. It was an insult, a skeleton of iron looming over a city of stone and grace. A group of 300 prominent writers, painters and architects signed a furious public protest, published in a Paris newspaper while the tower was still going up. They called it a useless, monstrous thing, a black factory chimney crushing the beauty of Paris beneath it, a dishonor to the city that would shame it for generations. One famous novelist, according to the story long told in Paris, ate lunch in the tower's restaurant almost every day, because it was the only place in the entire city from which he did not have to look at it. So the tower opened to scorn, and the clock on its 20-year permit began, quietly, to count down. Yet Gustave Eiffel was not a sentimental man. He was an engineer, and engineers do not save things with affection. They save things by proving they are necessary. From the very beginning, Eiffel had been searching for ways to make his tower indispensable, something no rational government could justify destroying. He turned its summit into a scientific instrument. He installed equipment to study the weather, to measure the wind that howled around the iron at 300 meters, to track temperature and air pressure high above the rooftops of the city. A permanent observatory in a place no observatory had ever stood. He funded experiments in aerodynamics, dropping objects from the tower to measure how they fell through the air. The tower became, in his hands, a laboratory in the sky. But none of it was enough to guarantee survival. Weather data could be gathered elsewhere. The city still held the deed, and the deadline still loomed. What saved the Eiffel Tower, in the end, was something no one in 1889 could even have imagined, because the science that would save it barely existed yet. In the closing years of the 19th century, a revolution was beginning, and it was invisible. Across Europe, inventors were learning to send messages through the air without any wire at all. They called it wireless telegraphy. Sparks would leap across a gap, throwing out waves of energy that traveled through empty space. And far away, another machine would catch them and turn them back into a signal. It was the dawn of radio. And to send these waves over great distances, you needed one thing above all others: height. You needed an antenna lifted as high into the sky as possible. There was, in all of France, no higher point than the top of the Eiffel Tower. Eiffel saw it immediately. Here, perhaps, was the purpose that could justify his tower's existence. Not beauty, not weather, but communication itself. Around the turn of the century, he opened the tower to the French military's wireless experiments and put his own personal fortune behind them, funding the research out of his own pocket. He understood, with the cold logic of an engineer, that a tower that helped defend France was a tower no one would dare to scrap. Engineers strung long antenna wires from the summit down toward the ground, turning the entire iron structure into the spine of a vast transmitting station. The tower had become a giant antenna. At first, the signals reached only across the city, then across the countryside. But the range grew with every experiment, every adjustment, every long night of sparks crackling in the dark. Soon, the tower was exchanging signals with military posts hundreds of kilometers away. Then it reached the warships of the French fleet far out in the Atlantic. By the first years of the new century, the tower was sending time signals across the ocean itself, broadcasting the exact hour into the open air so that ships far out at sea could set their clocks and fix their position from a beam borne at the top of a Paris monument. A structure built to last 20 years was now keeping time for a hemisphere. The structure Parisians had wanted to tear down was now speaking to the world. And so, when the 20-year permit finally expired in 1909, the unthinkable had become impossible. No government could dismantle an antenna that was now woven into the defense of the nation. The demolition order was quietly set aside. The clock that had been running out simply stopped. The tower had earned its place, not by being loved but by being needed. But its strangest, most secret chapter had not yet begun. That chapter would arrive with a war. In the summer of 1914, Europe collapsed into the First World War. Within weeks, German armies were driving deep into France, and Paris itself stood in mortal danger. And on top of the Eiffel Tower, the wireless station turned its attention from sending messages to a darker, quieter art, listening. Because the same antennas that could transmit signals across an ocean could also catch the signals of the enemy out of the empty air. German commanders sent their orders by wireless, trusting that distance and code would keep them safe. They did not account for the iron giant standing over Paris, listening to everything. The tower's operators intercepted German military transmissions and passed them to French intelligence, where codebreakers labored day and night to pull meaning out of the streams of dots and dashes pouring out of the air. The enemy was speaking, and Paris was quietly writing down every word. According to the long-told account of that first desperate autumn, intercepted wireless traffic helped reveal a fatal gap and hesitation in the German advance. Intelligence that fed into the counterattack on the Marne that halted the invasion and, it is said, helped save Paris itself. The monument the city had nearly scrapped for iron had become one of the most valuable weapons France possessed. And it never fired a shot. It only listened. And then, in the winter of 1917, the listening tower caught something that would echo far beyond the battlefield. Its antennas picked up a series of coded German wireless messages, transmitted in a cipher that French intelligence had already broken. Inside those messages, according to the case the French authorities later built, was reference to a paid agent operating in Paris, a spy moving through the highest circles of the city, codenamed in the enemy's own traffic. The trail led, the prosecution said, to one of the most famous women in Europe, a Dutch-born exotic dancer and courtesan who had captivated the salons and theaters of the continent, known to the world by a single stage name, Mata Hari. She was arrested in Paris, tried on charges of espionage for Germany, and the intercepted wireless messages stood at the heart of the case against her. In the autumn of 1917, she was executed. Historians still argue over how much she truly did and how much was wartime fear, suspicion and spectacle hunting for a scapegoat. But this much is not in dispute. The signals that helped doom her had been pulled out of the empty sky by an antenna that no one had ever wanted to build, and that the city had very nearly torn down. The tower that Paris tried to tear down had quietly become its eyes and ears, a sentinel that heard the enemy across hundreds of kilometers and changed the course of a war from the silence of its summit. Today, millions of people from every corner of the world stand beneath it each year and photograph it as the symbol of a beautiful city, the most romantic landmark on earth, the very face of Paris itself. Almost none of them know that it was condemned to die, that artists begged for its destruction, and that what saved it was not its beauty at all, but an invisible signal climbing the iron in the dark, reaching for an enemy who never knew the tower was listening. Which raises a question that the smiling crowds below have never thought to ask. How many of the things we now call beautiful were saved, in the end, only because they first learned how to be useful?